Thank you. Lest you be too concerned about my anti-democratic tendencies, I want to note that I only went back to 1982 in China as a base mark. If you'd gone back to 1972, you had political chaos in China, and they had no way to change their leaders. So I think democracy has significant advantages.
I trust you.
But we vary in the terms of the competence with which we staff our government, and I'm worried perhaps that we're not paying enough attention to that. But let's go to the Taiwan issue for a moment. We've gone through 8 years of constant tension in cross-strait relations because of the political forces at work in Taiwan. And now suddenly things have changed, and we have a new leadership emerging in Taiwan with the prospect, potentially, of significant changes in the cross-strait relationship. People are talking about 1 million mainland Chinese, for example, visiting Taiwan every year. There's been a lot of Taiwan visits to the mainland, but there has been very limited opportunity for mainlanders to come across. My question is, and this is really sort of a seat-of-the-pants reaction, is it possible that an improved cross-strait relationship could go so far that Americans would begin to become alarmed about the rapprochement across the Taiwan Strait?
Well, I must say, when I left Washington this morning, there was a headline, I believe in the Washington Times, that indicated that after the tensions, not only around the vote on the referendum issue, but the presence of U.S. military ships in the Straits, that things now, according to the Pentagon and the CIA, were calming down. And this was a front page story. And that there was now the opportunity for more of a political discussion and less of the risk that the intelligence community had been discussing of China doing some missile testing as a way to intimidate the Taiwanese. So there was lots of positive feeling surrounding this. What you're suggesting goes beyond that, that if, in fact, that this would be a trade that would somehow surprise, and I think it fits in with Geoffrey's argument, that in fact what we may see is increased trade among the Chinese people, trade that does not necessarily benefit the rest of the world. To me, that's a surprise. I don't think the conversation in our country is anywhere near that.
Well, on Taiwan, the thing that always strikes me is this complete disconnect between what I would take, and I think the C100 survey suggested is the reality in the U.S., not among the elite, but out there in the country, which is Taiwan's not a very important issue, and of course the Taiwanese should be independent. And this reality in China, both among elites and the C100 survey said among the Chinese public, that Taiwan is really important and Taiwan is part of China. So it seems to me that the way forward on Taiwan has always been, let's see if we can keep a lid on the overt political issues and let the economic integration, which is palpable, do the job. You know, I'm always struck by the fact, people in this audience do this far more than I do, but when you go into the Shanghai airport, they have a separate channel there at immigration for people coming from Taiwan, and it's just full of business people doing deals in Shanghai, right? That's going on. There are these big estimates about how much of foreign direct investment in Shanghai is from Taiwan. Economic integration seems, in a whole series of areas, but in this one in particular, to me, to be the way forward. And so any political strategy that can keep things out of the headlines and reduce the use of the word crisis is a good thing. And I was assuming, and maybe I can throw this back to you, Stape, I was assuming that the Chinese government in particular would be feeling so happy about the recent elections that the sort of political symbolism of nationalism would have gone down, which is why I find the Tibet thing so weird. Who really started it? From where I sit, I can't believe that the Chinese government had any interest in having this blow up. So how did it really happen?
Assuming that we know enough about the recent developments to come to firm conclusions, but there has been extensive coverage in the US media, some of it very well researched. And the picture that emerges from that coverage is that the Tibetan demonstrations were not a reaction to some actions that China had taken that generated this sudden outburst, but on the contrary had been carefully planned and was a coordinated effort to essentially try to advance the Tibetan cause by putting China on the spot, by demonstrating that Tibetans were unhappy with their condition inside China. So the question of why did the demonstrations occur, if these reports are accurate, is because they were planned to occur when they did. Now, why did the Chinese crack down the way they did, which gave the international media an opportunity to make it appear that China was using excessive violence against the peaceful demonstrations of the Tibetans? Actually, the picture looks much more mixed than that. There was extensive media coverage which showed rampaging mobs in Lhasa destroying Chinese shops, dragging people out, burning, looting. So you can't point the finger at one side or the other in terms of the violence. Clearly there is an underlying problem here, because you can't simply turn out people like this if there aren't some grievances there. But the question is why, and has the international reaction been helpful in producing a positive outcome? Because if the demonstrations and the international reaction to them damage the Olympics, damage the position of the Tibetans inside China, and damage China's relations with the outside world, then you have to say that this is a lose-lose-lose situation, and that whoever planned this program made a fundamental error in what they were trying to do. This does not mean that the underlying problem doesn't exist, but it suggests that an effort to advance the cause of Tibetans, and if you define that cause as independence, well, then you're opposing the views of the Dalai Lama, who has spoken out very clearly on this subject and said the solution must be within the People's Republic of China. The Dalai Lama has also said that he has always supported China hosting the Olympics, and he thinks Tibetans should do nothing to interfere with the hosting of the Olympics by China. And he has spoken out very sharply against anything that smacks of violence. He has also said it would not advance the cause of the Tibetans to act in ways that infuriate Chinese, Han Chinese, he means. Well, if that's his position, and if the Chinese government is prepared to address some of the underlying problems, it seems to me that this issue should not build up in a way that could damage the Olympics, but on the contrary ought to calm down. So I think that now is an interesting opportunity to see whether or not people sober up from what has happened and recognize that we need to look for a positive outcome from this and not a negative outcome. But at the moment, I would say we can't be confident how it's going to develop. The one thing that I have noted is that the Chinese government is concerned about the question, and instead of simply trying to engage in a massive propaganda effort to influence others, is actually fanning out to try to seek advice on how to manage this issue so that it doesn't damage China's interests, the interests of the Olympics, and ultimately the interests of Tibetans.